So this is Kris Jagasia. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Off the Class, and I have Tan Huynh here. Welcome everybody. Special thanks to Tan, who has joined us live at just 5 a.m. from Thailand. So it's fantastic to have Tan here. Just a couple short sentences about Tan. Tan is a career teacher, consultant, and author specializing in language acquisition and literacy development. Tan has taught students from 5th to 10th grade and is currently a language specialist and secondary social studies teacher. Today, we're here to discuss the topic of learning loss with respect to multilanguage learners. Before jumping into the topic of today, I'd love to learn a little bit about Tan's journey. Tan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, specific to your journey as a student, and how that led to you becoming a
Right,
teacher?
right. So I'm sure that none of my professors, both in my master's courses and both my bachelor's courses, never knew I was a refugee, right? They just thought like, oh, he was probably born in America. Because when they hear me talk and they see me write and they read my stuff, they're like, oh, yeah, he's been here forever. I'm like, no, we actually got on a boat, and I'm thinking about the Haitians, and I'm thinking about uh, the Afghans who've been flown out of their own countries, and I'm like, wow, they're like my brothers and sisters from years now. I'm like, we are refugees. I think like every time that there's an international border crisis, there are kids and there are children, there are parents, there are mothers, and there are men. I think in their group, my heart goes out to the children the most. So what you're talking who you're talking to is a person who benefited from the American education system. And so I started out as a little kid, not knowing any English, and now I teach teachers who support kids who are learning multiple languages.
Fantastic. That is a fascinating journey that it's all really come full circle for you. So that's
Right.
fantastic. Um, so really, the term today that we're here to discuss is the term learning loss, and what that
Right.
means is it's generally used to define as a reversal in academic process due to extended gaps in a student's education. So
Right.
you can imagine that the topic of learning loss is of particular interest now that we are entering, I believe, our 18th month of this pandemic. I think most educators agree that there has been some overall reversal in academic progress due to the COVID pandemic, but it's generally hard to quantify. Before talking about multi-language learners, Tan, what has your experience been like with the general student population over the last 18 months? Can you, I know it's really hard to quantify learning loss, but have you noticed any reversal in academic progress?
Reversal is an interesting word. Mm, I would say there is opportunities that the kids miss, different than reversal, right? So it's almost like saying like, oh, you haven't read in a year. Does your reading skills go down? Right. That's just so very interesting to me. Like, oh, I haven't been on a bike for years. Does that mean my biking skills now have lost? Like, no. So I think the term learning loss, we have to be very careful about that because we're saying, oh, schools are the only place where learning can happen. And then we're by saying that by default, we're also saying then homes are not places, communities are not places where students can learn. And that's totally untrue because when kids come to school when they're 4 or 5, whatever age they are, look how much learning they already have. We don't say, look, there's a learning loss because they didn't come to our school from day one when they were born. Right? If they don't say that, then why are we saying just because we had an interruption of learning that there has that there's learning loss. So we have to be careful about that because we kind of say families of multilingual learners aren't capable of teaching their kids. Then we go to saying they don't care about their kids. then we going saying they're not able to. So we have to be very careful, particularly talking about multilingual and diverse families, or marginalized or
Creates
minoritized families.
Yeah, it creates I could see how it creates a really dangerous kind of train of thought and a really
Right,
dangerous narrative. Yeah.
right, right. Here's why, because like, so my niece over the summer, I was just hanging out with them, with my sister there too, and they were planting seeds for the fall, and now the seeds have grown, and now they're caught on the vines, and now they're bearing fruit. And so those few months we weren't in school, but yet look at all the conversations that my sister is having with my nieces about like soil, what the soil needs, about planting seasons, about taking care of your plants at different phases, different parts of the plant, the bud, the stem, the leaf, and the fruit, and watch and observing how the fruit changes in shape and color, and then measuring it, and then weighting it, and then cooking it and talking about nutrition. Just the simple fact of gardening can be a science, can be a math, can be a culture lesson, can be an art lesson, all wrapped in one. So we can't say just because my niece was, they weren't in school from June to September that they weren't learning.
That's no, I think that's a really interesting perspective. When I think back to my early childhood education, I actually went to a French school, and both my
Oh,
parents are immigrants, but they don't speak French. I don't. They just thought it would be great to send me to a French school, and my parents weren't able to help me with my homework, but it doesn't mean they weren't involved in my education.
right,
Just because, yeah,
right. How are
yeah,
they involved in it? I think before I ask you that, I think people from different cultures see participation in different ways, right? And so
yeah.
the participation is happening and contributions are happening, and there's rich learning opportunities that are happening that we might not see, that might not be obvious to a Western culture. So how did your parents contribute to you?
I mean, a huge amount is just motivation. A
Right.
relatively large amount was like kind of like authority, like around like you have to complete your homework regardless of whether I can read French.
Right,
So yeah. Yeah, no, so it's really interesting kind of I really appreciate the kind of like positive outlook on the
right,
pandemic. I think it's really refreshing.
right.
Are there any other kind of opportunities that you've identified that have kind of come up out of this?
Oh yes. So often in our field we have something called, students in the field we have something called the silent period, where students are just waiting for their confidence to take root, and from then they'll participate. They might say something. Finally, when their fruit buds, it comes into speaking. So what happens is, in online learning, students aren't intimidated or scared, or that lack of confidence is in there, because they can simply put an emoji in. They can simply type a response. They can simply click to show a response on a poll. It's almost like technology is giving back students the voices that they lost before, right? By in-person instruction. As the beginners, oh, I'm talking about beginners, right?
Yeah,
Students can create things online. They can, of course, like for example, Google Slides, like they can add things, they can add images, text box, shapes, photos, and they can co-create with their friends. Um, and this is a way for teachers to say, oh my goodness, this kid is participating, this kid does understand. I think I clearly remember a time when I was working with a Korean student who I'll call Ryan. And Ryan was learning, he was a beginner in English, and he wouldn't say much at all for the first 8 months. And he would say yes and no, meaning like a yes, a whisper yes and a whisper no. And then one day I was like, okay, we have to figure out how to get you to participate, because yes and no is not going to work. So I gave him a platform. It's called Bunsey, and he started to create things with Bunsey. And I was working with this group of students, and I turned back and I said, oh, you do understand what I'm talking about. You just weren't willing to say anything. But looking at his slide, I was like, yeah, so we were learning about the education system in Rome during that time, and he was like, he had a picture of kids learning or boys learning in their robes, and they were in like this Roman-looking building, and then there was a teacher, and they even had text. And I was like, you can write in English? I didn't. What? He just needed a different way for his voice to be heard, and that's what
Yeah.
learning is doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, we've at Off the Class we kind of started from that online ESL world, and still today a lot of the folks that use Off the Class to teach, and a lot of the members of this group where we're hosting this webinar right now, are actually online ESL tutors. And I've long, since starting working on Off the Class, which was all the way back in 2013, 2014, we've long been really big proponents of learning languages online. It's
Right.
kind of what we're all about. And yeah, like, do you have a lot of experience doing live conversation based approach with some of your students online, or have you been able to have some of those experiences over the last year?
Yeah, so my students are all intermediate or almost becoming intermediate kids or very proficient students. So they're conversing. But for the kids
Awesome.
who are still beginning, what I often have them do is I have them converse with their friends in English, right? Because the goal is, sorry, not English, the converse in their home language. So it might be in Chinese, or it might be Filipino, or Talaga, or it might be Hindi. But they're talking together, and I'm okay with that. Actually, I love that. And then when it's time to work, they're working together to find the English words to produce and put onto the text, or to write in the chat box. And then so there is conversations, and there's engagement in speech, but sometimes it looks differently. Just because we want kids to produce English at the end later, it doesn't mean they can't start it in their home or first language, right? So if we're learning online and the kid is not speaking, maybe they're, if you have another group of, if you have kids together, I'm not sure if your tutoring program has like multiple kids at a time, they can speak in their home language, their first language, and then they can decide, how do we communicate this to Mr. Kris in English.
Okay, really cool. No, it's great to hear these perspectives, and also, just to hear about some positivity coming out of this pandemic. It's so rare that you hear these positive stories. So, obviously, I kind of read your bio at the start of the presentation, but if people want to learn more about you and kind of engage with you on different social channels and stuff like that, where can they find you?
Oh yes, I'll get to there in a minute. Can I also add a few more things about
Absolutely,
speech
please.
online? So this is what I often do. So when I have kids read, we always so we have reading and writing and rate. So those are big blocks of our education. So kids are reading something, or they're writing something, or they're watching a video. And so what I do is I make speaking as the main pillar that supports all those activities. So, for example, let's say that you and I are reading a text together, and Sarah is our teacher, and then she says, "Okay, we're going to put you in this small virtual group. What you're going to do is you're going to work together to read one paragraph at a time, and then try to comprehend the text. What you're going to do is you're going to summarize each paragraph in an annotation together. Only one person needs to write, but you both need to talk about the text. So we would we would read the article, and we would talk about, like, so what do you think this paragraph means, and then we would write it down. So yes, they're reading, but the speaking is the vehicle that gets them to the through the reading. And the same thing with writing. Let's say that the kids now have to produce writing based upon that text, or writing based upon the video. They're going to have to talk about, okay, so we know we have to write a topic sentence. What is the first thing we should put in the topic sentence? What's that top? Now let's move to the example. What are we putting in the example? And then finally, how do we explain the example? So everything we're doing for kids is, they see it as, oh, reading and writing, but they're also getting language development uh, through speaking. And of course, again, they could speak in their first language, or in English, or they can change language. So they can go in and out. For example, if I was right now, if you're both, so if let's say that you're Vietnamese and you're more fluent than I am, and so, or let me give you an example. So my ex-boyfriend and I, we would speak. He's very fluent in Vietnamese, and I am intermediate, and so we would go in and out of using English words, in English in Vietnamese words. A lot of it would be, most of it would be Vietnamese, but I would pull words in that I don't know. So instead of going around it, I just go to the English word and say, "Here's the English word. Let's continue the conversation." And he gets it, and we continue. And that's the same thing with your kids. So tutors, if your kids are using multiple languages at the same time, that's natural. That's what people do when they have multiple languages. They're trying to figure out, okay, wait, I don't know this word. Let me pull this word as a puzzle piece to put into the sentence, right? And so encourage that and support that. Was that your experience too, Kris? I don't know
Yeah,
what
well, I
language
mean,
you
I
speak.
was actually tutoring my nephew yesterday. He's a German speaker,
Oh,
online, of course. He lives in Germany, and I fully prescribe to that notion. I have absolutely no problem with him using the German words when he doesn't know the English word. I'd rather flow. And he has the luxury, of course, of getting a one-on-one tutor, because
yeah,
I meet up with him and tutor him directly on Sundays. But at the end of the day, I would rather things flow than get stuck on a single word.
right,
Absolutely, and I agree. It's like a puzzle, and he's able to kind of bring it in,
right,
and I think it's really positive for the language
right,
development.
right. I love the way you talked about flow. The analogy is that communication, we need communication to flow. So anything that blocks it prevents flow from happening. And anything that prevents flow from happening really hampers thinking and then hampers communication. And so we want kids to flow with anything they have. So that's partly English, that's partly German, that's partly French, whatever they have, they're just adding in the words that they need. The goal is that we want kids to participate. So seek participation before
Hmm.
perfection, right? I know that.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that half the equation is motivation.
Right.
And it's not going to be very motivating if every time you go and attempt something, you're just shut down because you don't
Right.
know. I don't know. I forget the word we got stuck up on yesterday, but it was very specific.
Right.
It's motivation is everything, and I have to say, my nephew's into the English lessons. Like he's doesn't find it like a massive chore. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, that means you're a good teacher. What's working for you online?
I'm trying. Well, I use off the class, so I've got pre-prepared lesson content. So it's like a specific scope and sequence. So
Right.
there is that benefit. It is, of
Right.
course, also like I have the luxury of not having to like merge into a curriculum of like a state or a school level curriculum. It's fully supplementary. So I do believe in supplementary kind of ELD lessons, English language development lessons, I think are always a
Mm-hmm.
great fit where that is available. Um, so yeah, I think learning exactly what you were saying at the start of today's conversation. Learning is not only what you do at school,
Right.
and my nephew's English classes at school are not what are really teaching him to speak English. A lot of it's happening by meeting up with his uncle and having these
Right.
kind of less formal
Right.
online lessons. Yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, I just think about, for example, so I learned Lao. So I guess let's go back to my niece's example of planting in the summer. So I speak Vietnamese exclusively to her because I want her to maintain her Vietnamese language. So as we're talking about planting, we're using all these words uh, in Vietnamese, and this opportunity is so enriching in that it's very different than her parents would like to have her sit down and open a Vietnamese book and have her write, like, here, write the word apple in Vietnamese 10 times. I'm like, why don't we just go outside and plant an apple tree? Or let's go to an apple orchard. Let's go make apple cider. Let's uh, look at let's eat different apples and let's create things with the different apples. And we're using Vietnamese with that. And so all the words that she would be learning in a book, they come to life when we interact with our children, our students. And this is what I mean by it's not learning laws. It's saying learning in different ways. Right? It's not by
Yeah.
book, yet it's still learning.
Yeah, no, that and it's also exactly about tying positive experience with the language development so that
Right.
when you go and kind of think about English and the acquisition there, you've got positive kind of connection with it.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I love it. That's a very positive outlook on the whole pandemic and the challenges and kind of solutions ahead. Um, Off class is all
So
about teachers. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So you talked about positive, and I wanted to like jump on that word. I want to highlight that word because when we work with students, particularly multilingual students, positivity must be the first word we think about. Because we used to call kids like limited English proficient, and when we call them that, we say they're limited in English. And even when we think about English, now we call them English learners, or we call ESL. So we only think about English as the main thing they're learning, right? But at the price of what? So if we're focusing on just English acquisition, then we are probably not thinking about maintaining their home language. And language is so connected to culture that when we explicitly focus on one language, we have to be careful. Is this linguistic imperialism? Anyways, going circling back to positivity, when we see what multilinguals can do, again, that focus of can do, the way we teach changes and transforms and morphs.
That's a great perspective as well. So off to class is all about teachers is kind of part of our thing. I'd love to hear a little bit more. You had some good strategies for some of the teachers that are listening today, but anything else you can share, whether it's strategies or motivation or things you've learned since the pandemic about how teachers can be um, more engaged or really be a solution to language acquisition.
Mm. So I would say there's one thing I really recommend that I do now with my kids. I started it last year with a few of my classes, and I continue on with this year. It's a dialogue journal between the student and I. So I have classes with them twice a week. I see my kids twice a week for 90 minutes each time, so it's a lot. The first 5 minutes of the first class of that week, let's say they meet them on Monday and then I see them again on Wednesday. On Monday, they come into class virtually and then they go into something called a check in journal, where it's a document they're both just only they and I have access to that document. They're allowed to share anything they want with me in that document. They can write, so they're typing their response. They usually talk about their weekend, but they share things that are really cool about their hobbies, their interests, things they did over the week, things they're thinking about upcoming. And so what I do is I receive it, and then I read it in the evening or afternoon. I respond very quickly as a quick comment on the side, and then we continue this conversation. This is a really wonderful way for them for if you're working with multilinguals, a great way to develop their English skills, the English fluency writing, but also a great way for them to learn from you and to interact with you. A lot of our kids who are learning English come from collectivist cultures. And in collectivist cultures, they really value social interaction and learning as a community. So, what a great way to do both to have language fluency, to develop language writing fluency, and also for students to see us as humans and for us to see them in different ways, uh, not just a student. Because I started this when I was working with my 10th graders, and I felt like I was the teacher assigning them work, just assigning work. And they were the kids who were just giving back work, and I was giving them feedback. I'm like, I don't know you as a person beyond a student. You don't know me as a person beyond a teacher. So when we started this, our relationship started to change as a individually, but also as a class.
Well, what a fantastic way. There must be great tie-ins for motivation and personalization as well,
Right,
because one thing that I believe is curriculum or lesson content, anything like that. It is good lesson content is designed to be personalized for the learners. And if
right.
you have that journal relationship with your learners, you know what makes them tick, you know what sports they like, you know what hobbies they like, you know all sorts of different things about them. So that must make it really easy to kind of personalize things as you go for your learners.
Yeah, it's all about differentiation that way.
Yeah. That's awesome. Wow, what a great conversation. So we are coming down to the line now, and I'd love to hear from you about projects that you have on, where
Right,
we can
right,
find you online, and just
right,
for anybody here today, where we can go learn more from you.
right, right. My first content that people can find me at is my blog, tankwyn.com. So it's Huynh. Um, it's funny. There's the word tank inside of my name. I'm like, I'm such a peace loving person, and yet there's the word tank and win. That's how it is. It's fine, not a problem. Um, I have lots and lots of I have 130 some articles that I've written, mostly that I've written from my experience, and most of them have like references to like periodic to articles or books that I've written. I realized that a lot of people don't read articles. For example, I love learning, and yet I don't read a lot of articles, but I listen to 4 or 5 podcasts a day. And I'm like, well, let me change that platform into an audio platform. And so now I have 80 episodes of a podcast, and it's so different. I feel like I get to have a relationship with the teachers, and I get to share, and I get amazing, like prolific authors in the field to come join and share their knowledge. And then I currently am facilitating courses online. I've recently written a book about taking charge of your own professional learning, because oftentimes teachers of multilingual learners they don't have a budget to learn, so they don't they or the expert that comes in, the that comes in, is not about language development. So I said, well, me and two other authors, Carol Salva and Dr. Katie Topol, have written. We came together and we worked on a book about saying how here are ways you can supercharge your own professional learning without having a dedicated budget from the school district. And so the books, the conferences, the free blog, the free podcast, and the free conferences are all examples of that. And then I also in addition to the webinars and consulting that I do, I also offer teachers online courses through English Learner Portal. And I really like that because 1 day workshops are great, but they're like vitamin pills or like a Thanksgiving dinner. It's really great to sit in a room for 8 hours and to learn. But by the end of that, you're like, I'm full. But the next day, you still need to eat. So, in addition to the webinars that people attend or the workshops people attend, I encourage people to look at courses, and I have 2 courses. One is on scaffolding learning, and one is about teacher collaboration. So they continue their learning instead of just attending a workshop once.
Awesome. And we have linked, you, my colleague Chris Rush did that.